The alien narrator remembered the first time he saw the humans step onto the battlefield. He had fought in many wars before. He had seen countless armies across the galaxy, tall insectoid warriors with razor claws, reptilian legions covered in scales and armor, even machines of pure steel that never felt pain. He thought he had seen everything. He thought nothing could ever surprise him again. But then, the humans arrived. At first, he almost laughed. They looked fragile. Their skin had no natural armor. Their bodies seemed small compared to the giants of war. Their eyes were soft, their faces too emotional. These were not warriors, he thought. These were prey, dressed in metal. The alien council had warned him long ago. Humans are dangerous. Humans are unpredictable. But he, like many others, dismissed those words. How could such weak creatures be dangerous? How could emotions win battles? That day, on that battlefield, he learned the truth. The sky was red with fire. The ground shook with the sound of war machines. Enemy fleets rained destruction from above. Soldiers of a dozen species trembled as the enemy advanced, their weapons burning through everything in their path. Even the narrator felt fear pressing down on his chest. And then, he saw them. The human soldiers walked forward. Not running. Not screaming. Walking. Their steps were slow, steady, and silent. They carried weapons that looked simple compared to the galaxy's most advanced machines. But it was not their weapons that drew his eyes, it was their faces. Their eyes were cold, unblinking, burning with something deeper than anger. Determination. A promise. A warning. The narrator felt his throat go dry. He had never felt this before, not fear of the enemy, but fear of the one standing beside him. The humans did not speak. They did not shout. They did not even look at the other armies. They simply moved forward, like shadows. Silent. Certain. Unstoppable. The battlefield seemed to grow quieter as they marched. Even the enemy, for a brief second, hesitated. For the first time, the narrator saw terror, not in the faces of the weak, but in the faces of those who thought they were strong. The alien remembered one moment clearly. A human soldier passed him by, close enough for their eyes to meet. There was no smile. No emotion. Just a cold fire, as if death itself had chosen to wear human skin. The narrator's hands shook. His heart pounded. In all his years of war, he had never once feared an ally. But now, standing beside humans, he realized something he could not explain. It was not only their weapons. It was not only their tactics. It was something deeper, something that lived inside them. A force invisible, but stronger than any armor. The council had been right. Humans were unpredictable. Humans were dangerous. Still, he told himself it was only an illusion. Surely, once the battle began, these fragile beings would fall like all others. Surely, their weakness would be revealed. But a voice in his mind whispered another truth. You are wrong. And soon, you will see why. The battlefield was about to explode into chaos. The enemy's war drums echoed across the land, shaking the ground like thunder. Soldiers braced for impact. The narrator raised his weapon, his body trembling. And then he looked at the humans again. They were not trembling. They were not afraid. Their silence was more terrifying than the roar of any army. It was the silence of predators before the kill. For the first time in his long life, the narrator felt something he had never known in war. True fear. And it came not from the enemy. It came from the humans. The war began with fire. The enemy army did not wait. They came like a storm, their weapons cutting through the air, their ships darkening the sky above. The ground shook as machines of war rolled forward, their cannons glowing with energy. Every other army, the insectoids, the reptilians, the machines, braced themselves with shields and defensive lines. But the humans, they moved differently. The narrator watched them scatter into strange positions, breaking apart from the straight formation that every soldier in the galaxy was trained to use. To him, it looked like chaos. Disorder. A mistake. He remembered thinking, they do not even know how to march properly. And then the battle began. The enemy fired first. Explosions lit the sky, fire and smoke covering the battlefield. Many soldiers fell. The alien narrator ducked behind cover, his heart pounding, his ears ringing. He saw his people trying to hold their lines, but the enemy was stronger, faster, merciless. Yet, through the smoke, the humans did not fall back. They rushed forward. The narrator could hardly believe his eyes. While every other army hid behind shields, the humans ran toward the fire. Bullets, lasers, and plasma cut across the ground, yet the humans kept moving. Some fell, but the rest pressed on. And then, he saw their tactics. One human soldier slid into the dirt, pulling out a strange weapon that spat fire in short, sharp bursts. Another climbed onto a broken vehicle, firing from above, drawing the enemy's attention. A third crawled low to the ground, placing small metal objects, bombs, traps, death waiting to explode. It was chaos. Pure chaos. But it was not random. Slowly, the narrator began to see the pattern. The humans were not acting alone. Each wild, reckless move was connected to the next. One soldier distracted, another attacked. One fell, another took his place. They moved like predators in a pack. The enemy had faced armies before. They had fought soldiers who followed orders perfectly, who marched in straight lines, who obeyed their generals without question. And against those armies, the enemy always won. But the humans were different. They broke every rule. They twisted every strategy. They turned disorder into power. The narrator watched in shock as the enemy's advance slowed. Their war machines, once unstoppable, now hesitated. Their soldiers, once fearless, now searched the smoke in confusion, not knowing where the next attack would come from. The humans were everywhere. And nowhere. One moment, they were in front of him. The next, they were gone, crawling through the ruins like shadows, reappearing behind enemy lines. Explosions tore through the battlefield, enemy soldiers falling in screams of terror. The narrator's people fought bravely, but he could see the truth with his own eyes. This was not their victory. This was not their war. This was the humans' war. He remembered one moment that froze in his memory forever. A human soldier, badly wounded, blood running down his arm, refused to stop. Instead of retreating, he pushed forward. He fired until his weapon clicked empty, then he picked up the enemy's weapon and kept fighting. The narrator's people would have left such a man behind. Too injured, too weak. But not the humans. Another soldier appeared, grabbed the wounded man, and pulled him to safety while still firing with his other hand. The narrator felt his chest tighten. He had never seen such loyalty. Such madness. Such terrifying strength. The enemy commander grew desperate. He ordered his forces to crush the humans with everything they had. Massive energy blasts lit up the ground, tearing apart whole sections of the battlefield. Entire squads were vaporized. And yet, the humans kept coming. The narrator looked at them, and a thought chilled him to his bones. These are not soldiers. These are something else. He saw their faces as they fought. They were not calm. They were not emotionless like the machines. They were alive. Their anger, their pain, their determination burned brighter than the fire around them. For the first time, the enemy was not laughing. For the first time, the enemy was afraid. The narrator gripped his weapon tighter, his hands shaking. He realized the truth. If these humans were his enemies instead of his allies, he would already be dead. The narrator had seen victory before. He had seen armies win battles through numbers, strength, or technology. But what he witnessed now was something else, something he had no words for. It was not just the weapons. It was not just the tactics. It was the humans themselves. They fought in a way no other species could understand. The reptilian soldiers fought for pride. They wanted glory. They wanted to prove themselves to their ancestors. The insectoid armies fought for their queens, obeying every command like machines. The mechanical warriors fought for efficiency, every move calculated, every step programmed. But the humans fought for each other. The narrator saw it again and again. One human would run into open fire, not for himself, but to cover a comrade. Another would throw himself onto a grenade, choosing death so others might live. He even saw a human with broken legs, dragging himself across the ground with his arms, still firing his weapon to protect his squad. The narrator felt his chest tighten as he realized the truth: humans did not fight to survive. They fought so that others could survive. And that made them unstoppable. The battlefield burned around him, smoke rising like black clouds into the sky. The screams of the dying echoed through the ruins. Yet through the chaos, the humans pressed forward. Every time the enemy tried to break their lines, the humans pushed back, stronger, louder, fiercer. It was not discipline. It was not training. It was something deeper, something inside them. The narrator remembered one moment clearly. A human soldier, his arm shattered and useless, still refused to stop fighting. Instead, he tied his weapon to his body with strips of cloth, holding the trigger with his teeth. The alien narrator stared in shock. This was not just bravery. This was madness. But it was also something terrifyingly effective. He began to understand why the council had warned them. Humans did not know when to stop. Humans did not understand surrender. The enemy grew frustrated. They had crushed hundreds of worlds with their armies. They had destroyed civilizations that had stood for thousands of years. But against the humans, their power seemed smaller, weaker. The enemy soldiers aimed for the humans first now. They had realized the truth too late. But targeting the humans did not break them. It only made them angrier. The narrator watched in disbelief as a squad of humans charged a machine 10 times their size. They climbed it like ants, tearing open panels, planting explosives, and leaping off seconds before it exploded. The fireball lit up the battlefield, and the humans cheered with voices that sent chills down the narrator's spine. It was not victory they celebrated. It was survival. It was the fact that their brothers and sisters were still alive. The narrator's own people, brave and disciplined as they were, looked shaken. They could not understand it. To them, war was about orders, strategy, and survival. To the humans, war was something more. They fought with love. Not love for glory, or for honor. But love for the ones standing beside them. And love, the narrator realized, was more dangerous than any weapon. The enemy commander, furious and desperate, ordered a new attack. A massive wave of reinforcements surged forward, stronger than before. Entire sections of the battlefield crumbled under the assault. The narrator raised his weapon, ready to fight, but before he could fire, he saw the humans move again. They did not wait for orders. They did not pause to think. They simply acted. Some drew fire away from their allies, others set traps, and others charged head-on, screaming their strange war cries. The narrator shivered. He had heard many war cries before, but nothing like this. The human voices shook the air, echoing across the battlefield like thunder. It was not just noise. It was fury. It was pain. It was hope. And it terrified everyone who heard it. The enemy faltered. Their advance slowed. Some even began to fall back. The narrator could hardly believe it. The most feared army in the galaxy, the enemy that had crushed countless civilizations, was retreating. Not because of numbers. Not because of superior weapons. But because of humans. He looked at them, standing in the smoke and fire, blooded but unbroken. He felt his throat tighten as he whispered to himself. They should not be here. They should not even be alive. And yet, they are the strongest of us all. The narrator realized something terrifying that day. The galaxy had feared the enemy for centuries. But now, the galaxy would learn a new fear. The fear of fighting beside humans. The battle should have been won. The humans had done the impossible. They had forced the enemy to retreat step by step. Their war cries still echoed across the field, and for the first time in centuries, the enemy army looked uncertain. But the enemy was not finished. The narrator felt it before he saw it, the ground trembling, the sky darkening, the air itself burning. Then it appeared. A war machine so large it blotted out the sun. It was taller than mountains, covered in black armor that shimmered with red light. Every step shook the battlefield. Every movement brought destruction. On its shoulders, cannons big enough to erase entire cities glowed with power. The narrator's people froze. Even the bravest soldiers stopped firing. Fear spread like a shadow over the entire field. The enemy laughed, their voices carrying across the smoke. "This is the end," they cried. "No one can stand against it." The narrator wanted to believe they were wrong, but when he looked at the machine, towering above them all, he felt despair. His own people began to step back, their courage breaking. He thought the battle was lost. Then he turned to the humans. They did not retreat. They looked at the war machine with the same cold eyes as before. No fear. No hesitation. Only determination. One of them raised his weapon and shouted something strange, words the narrator did not understand, but the tone was clear, it was a challenge. And then the humans charged. The narrator's heart almost stopped. He could not believe what he was seeing. Dozens of tiny figures running toward a machine large enough to destroy worlds. To anyone else, it looked like madness. To the humans, it was their only choice. The war machine fired. A beam of energy cut across the ground, melting steel, turning stone into liquid. Entire squads vanished in a single flash. The air filled with screams. Still, the humans kept going. They used speed instead of strength. They ran low, they rolled, they dived through fire. Some went left, some went right, others climbed directly onto the machine's legs. The narrator watched in disbelief as the humans crawled up the giant war engine like ants on a predator. They carried explosives, ropes, and strange tools. They moved with perfect coordination, shouting to each other, covering each other, never leaving anyone behind. The enemy fired again and again, tearing the ground apart, but they could not stop them all. The narrator saw one human leap onto the machine's arm, planting a bomb before being struck down by a blast. Another climbed higher, dragging two others with him, even as enemy fire rained down. It was not just courage. It was madness. But it worked. Explosions shook the war machine as bombs tore into its armor. Sparks flew, smoke poured from its joints. Still, it kept moving, crushing soldiers beneath its massive feet. The narrator's hands shook as he raised his weapon. He fired too, desperate to help, but he knew his shots were meaningless compared to what the humans were doing. And then it happened. A group of humans reached the top of the machine. The narrator could barely see them through the smoke, but he heard their screams, battle cries so loud they drowned out even the roar of the enemy cannons. The humans planted the final charge. For one terrible second, the battlefield went silent. Everyone, enemy and ally alike, watched as the humans leapt from the machine's back, falling through the smoke. And then the sky exploded. The war machine split apart in a storm of fire and metal. Its body crashed to the ground with a sound like thunder, crushing everything beneath it. Silence followed. The enemy, once so confident, stared in shock at the ruins of their greatest weapon. The narrator's own people stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just seen. And in the middle of the smoke, the humans rose. Burned, bleeding, covered in dust, but alive. They raised their weapons, shouting in triumph. The narrator felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought he knew fear when the humans first walked onto the battlefield. But now he understood something worse. The humans were not only dangerous. They were unstoppable. The enemy had unleashed their greatest weapon, and the humans had destroyed it with their bare hands. The narrator whispered to himself, voice trembling. If they can do this to the enemy, what would happen if one day, they turned their power against us? The battlefield was no longer just a place of war. It had become something else. A warning. And the galaxy would never forget it. The battlefield was a graveyard. Smoke rose in thick clouds, the stench of fire and metal filled the air. The ground was torn apart, craters and rubble everywhere. The enemy, once so proud, had fallen back in chaos. Their machines were broken, their soldiers scattered, and their morale shattered. But the narrator could not breathe. He had fought in countless wars, faced armies that could crush worlds, stood against monsters of unimaginable strength. He had never felt fear like this. Not for himself. Not for his people. He felt fear for the humans. The enemy had unleashed everything: energy cannons, firestorms, the largest war machines ever built. They had destroyed cities, armies, and planets in their conquest. And yet, the humans had faced it all, unbroken. They had charged straight into death and come out alive. The narrator watched in horror as they moved among the wreckage. Some were on fire, their clothes burned, skin scarred, yet they still fired their weapons. Others dragged comrades out of craters filled with smoke and shattered metal. Still others climbed over fallen machines, leaping from one to the next, planting explosives with precise timing. It was no longer a battle. It was a display of raw, unstoppable will. The enemy commander roared, ordering every remaining weapon to fire. Massive energy blasts tore through the battlefield, obliterating entire squads. The ground shook violently. Alien soldiers screamed as they were thrown from the rubble, their bodies broken. Yet the humans pressed on. One human soldier, barely conscious, limped forward holding a heavy weapon. Sparks flew from its damaged barrel, yet he refused to stop. Another human, missing an arm, hurled grenades while pulling a wounded teammate to safety. The narrator could hardly look. He knew this should be impossible. No being should survive this. No army should resist this. And yet, he saw the enemy falter. Their fear grew. Their soldiers stopped firing, their machines hesitated, their strategy crumbled. The humans had turned the impossible into reality. Then he saw the moment that broke him. A human leapt onto the top of an enemy war machine, blood running down his face, burns covering his body. He planted explosives, yelling a cry that echoed across the battlefield. The narrator felt it deep in his chest, something primal. Terror. The machine erupted into fire and steel. Enemy soldiers screamed as it collapsed. Entire squads were wiped out. And still, the human soldier stood, barely moving, as if the fire could not touch him. The narrator felt his knees weaken. He had seen the strongest armies fall. He had seen worlds burn. He had seen monsters die. But never had he seen something so small, so fragile, create such fear. The humans were not just brave. They were something else entirely. Something the galaxy had never seen. He realized now what the Council had meant. Humans were unpredictable, yes. But unpredictability was not their only strength. They were relentless, cunning, fearless, and loyal to each other in a way no other species could understand. The narrator could not speak. His weapon hung useless in his hands. He watched as a group of humans, covered in blood and ash, stood on the battlefield like shadows of death. They had survived fire, destruction, and impossible odds, and they were still coming. The enemy commander, now shaking, ordered retreat. His soldiers obeyed, leaving behind all they had fought for. The battlefield belonged to the humans now. The narrator fell to his knees, gasping. He had fought countless battles, yet he had never felt true fear until this moment. The fear was not that humans could die, but that they could never be stopped. That they could rise from the ashes of war, stronger and more dangerous than before. He looked at them. At their blooded, exhausted, triumphant faces. And he understood, these were not creatures to be underestimated. Not allies to rely on, not enemies to fear casually. Humans were something else entirely. Something unstoppable. Something terrifying. And in that moment, the narrator whispered, almost to himself, as the wind carried the cries of victory across the battlefield. If this is what humans are like on a single battlefield, what will they be capable of in the wars to come? The ground still shook. The fires burned. The humans stood victorious among the ruin, their presence alone a warning to anyone who might challenge them. The narrator had fought many wars, faced many foes, and seen countless horrors. But nothing had left him shaken like this. Nothing had shown him true terror, until he stood beside the humans. The battlefield was quiet now, but the silence was heavy. Smoke still rose from the ruins, fires flickered among broken machines, and the air smelled of burned metal and charred earth. The enemy had retreated, defeated, their pride shattered. Victory belonged to the humans. But it was not a victory without cost. The narrator walked among the survivors, feeling the weight of what had happened. He had watched humans charge into fire, climb mountains of metal, and face death again and again. Many had fallen. Many more were wounded. Blood stained their clothes, their faces, their hands. Yet, they still stood, some leaning on each other, some dragging their comrades to safety. It was a victory, yes. But it was also a testament to their price. He saw one human soldier collapse, exhaustion finally catching up to him. His armor was torn, his weapon bent, and his face covered in soot. Another knelt beside him, pressing a hand against his chest, whispering something the narrator could not understand. And when the wounded soldier opened his eyes, he nodded, forcing himself to stand again. The narrator realized then that humans did not see pain the way others did. They did not give up when they were hurt. They kept moving, kept fighting, kept surviving, not for glory, not for reward, but for each other. He turned and looked at the battlefield again. Machines were destroyed. Cities had been burned. Enemy soldiers were fleeing in terror. And yet, in the middle of this chaos, the humans stood tall. Some were silent. Some shouted, some cried, some laughed in relief. Their emotions were raw, unfiltered, powerful. They did not hide their pain. They did not hide their fear. But their courage, raw, human courage, burned brighter than the fires around them. The narrator walked among them, feeling something he had never felt before, awe. He remembered the alien council's warning again. Humans are unpredictable. He now understood it fully. They were unpredictable not because of random chaos, but because of their resilience. Their loyalty. Their refusal to surrender. The narrator saw one human reach the edge of the battlefield. Around him lay the bodies of his fallen comrades. For a moment, he seemed to falter, his shoulders slumping under the weight of grief. But then he raised his head, clenched his fists, and looked back at the war-torn land. His eyes burned with determination. They will never stop, the narrator whispered to himself. And they wouldn't. The enemy had poured everything into this battle, their strongest weapons, their deadliest soldiers, their most powerful war machines. And still, the humans had survived. They had not just survived. They had won. And they had done it with a force no other species could understand: unity, courage, and relentless determination. The narrator's people looked around, exhausted and afraid, realizing that their victory, if it could be called that, was small compared to what humans had achieved. The humans had faced death itself and refused to die. They had stared into the eye of destruction and walked through it alive. And the narrator realized something terrifying. The humans' victory today was only the beginning. They had survived the impossible once. They would survive it again. And next time, the consequences could be far worse for anyone who underestimated them. He remembered the wounded soldiers, the burned machines, the shattered landscape. The cost was high. The price of victory was blood and fire and endless struggle. Yet, the humans bore it. And they bore it with a strength that made even the narrator tremble. For the first time, he understood the full meaning of their power. Not the power of weapons. Not the power of numbers. But the power of humanity itself, their courage, their loyalty, their refusal to surrender. The narrator fell silent, watching the humans as they tended to the wounded, helped the weak, and gathered their dead. Each action was simple, yet it carried a weight that no alien could match. And in that silence, he realized the final truth. Humans were not just survivors. Humans were unstoppable. The battlefield would remember this day. The enemy would remember this day. And the galaxy, if it survived, would one day learn to fear humans in a way it had never feared anything else. The narrator looked around one last time, awe and fear mingling in his heart. He could not forget what he had seen. He would carry it with him forever. For today, the humans had won. And tomorrow, the galaxy would tremble. The war was over. Or at least, it seemed so. The battlefield lay in ruins, smoke curling into the sky. Fires still burned, casting flickering shadows across shattered machines and fallen soldiers. The humans had survived, but the cost was heavy. Their faces were streaked with blood, dirt, and exhaustion. Their bodies were battered, but their eyes, those burning, unyielding eyes, still shone with determination. The narrator walked among them, trying to understand what he had witnessed. He had fought in wars across countless systems, seen death and destruction beyond imagining. Yet, he had never seen anything like this. These humans had faced the impossible, survived, and triumphed. They had stood against death itself, not with technology, not with numbers, not with superior weapons, but with something far more dangerous. The narrator realized, slowly, that the council had been right all along. Humans were unpredictable. But that was only part of the truth. They were not unpredictable in chaos. They were unpredictable in courage, loyalty, and sheer willpower. They were unpredictable because no one, not the galaxy's strongest armies, not its most cunning commanders, could ever anticipate what they would do next. He remembered every moment, the humans charging into firestorms, dragging the wounded, planting explosives on massive war machines, standing tall when everyone else fell. He remembered the terror in the enemy commander's eyes, the chaos that spread among the enemy lines, the victory that had seemed impossible. And then the narrator understood the full lesson. Humans do not fight to win. Humans fight to protect each other. Humans fight because they refuse to surrender. That was the real weapon. The narrator's own people had relied on rules, discipline, and strength. They had fought wars for glory, for honor, for survival. But humans fought for something greater, for family, for friends, for each other. And that made them unstoppable. He thought of the soldiers he had seen fall in battle, only to rise again. He thought of the humans who had faced death without hesitation, who had turned impossible odds into victory. He felt a cold chill run through him as he realized the truth. If humans were ever fully awakened, if they ever decided to fight for themselves instead of only defending, they would become more than a threat. They would become a force the galaxy could not contain. The narrator returned to his people, carrying the lesson he had learned on the battlefield. He tried to speak, to warn them, but many did not believe him. They laughed at his fear, just as he had once laughed at the council's warnings. They said humans were small, fragile, weak. But the narrator knew the truth. He had seen it with his own eyes. He had stood beside humans in war and understood their power. He told them stories of courage, of loyalty, of relentless determination. He described the humans charging through fire, standing atop enemy machines, refusing to die. He described the terror in the enemy commander's eyes. Some listened. Some mocked. Some shook their heads in disbelief. But he could not stop thinking about what he had seen. He could not stop feeling the fear that humans had inspired in him. It was not a fear of death. It was a fear of power. A fear of what these beings could do if truly pushed. The lesson was clear. The humans were more than just another species. They were a force of nature. And any who underestimated them, the narrator knew, would pay the ultimate price. He walked alone through the remnants of the battlefield, remembering every face, every cry, every victory and loss. And he made a silent vow, he would never forget what he had witnessed. He would never forget the humans. Because he had learned something that day that could not be taught. Something that could not be ignored. Humans were not just soldiers. Humans were unstoppable. Humans were terrifying. And humans were the future of war in the galaxy. The narrator understood that his life, his people, and perhaps even the galaxy, had changed forever. The humans had shown him the true meaning of courage, of fear, and of power. And he knew, without a doubt, that anyone who faced them in the future would learn this lesson the hard way. The humans had not only survived the war, they had rewritten the rules of battle. And the narrator, standing among the ruins, knew one thing for certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. The war was over. Or at least, this battle was over. The battlefield lay silent now, smoke curling into the sky, fires flickering among the ruins, the bodies of machines and soldiers alike scattered across the scorched earth. The humans had survived. The enemy had fled. And the narrator, still breathing heavily, had learned the full meaning of fear. Not fear of death. Not fear of the enemy. Fear of humans. The narrator stood alone, looking over the battlefield, remembering every moment. Every charge into fire, every wounded soldier dragged to safety, every impossible act of courage. Every human who had faced death, laughed at it, and kept moving forward. He thought of their eyes, burning with determination, unyielding, fearless. He thought of their voices, shouting war cries that shook the enemy's machines, that turned chaos into strategy, that made even the most powerful warriors hesitate. The narrator knew now what the council had warned about. Humans were unpredictable. But unpredictability was only the beginning. Humans were cunning, fearless, relentless. They fought for each other in ways no other species could understand. And their loyalty, their unbreakable bond, was their deadliest weapon. He turned to the horizon, where the enemy forces were retreating in disarray. He could see the commanders shouting orders, trying to regroup, trying to comprehend the impossible. It was impossible. The humans had survived, had won, had defied all logic and expectation. And they had done it without surrender, without compromise, without hesitation. The narrator's chest tightened. He had fought in countless wars, witnessed unimaginable destruction, and faced enemies that could crush entire civilizations. And yet, he had never felt fear like this. Not until he stood beside humans. He realized the truth now. A truth he could not ignore. A warning he must carry to the galaxy. Humans are not to be underestimated. Humans are not weak. Humans are not predictable. They are a force unlike any other. The narrator imagined the future. The humans would survive again. They would rise from fire and ruin stronger than before. They would fight again, and the galaxy, if it ignored their power, would pay a terrible price. He thought of the enemy commanders, trembling, powerless against these small, fragile creatures. And he shivered, knowing that any who faced humans without understanding them would face the same fate. He could already see it in his mind: entire fleets destroyed, armies broken, civilizations brought to their knees. All because humans refused to stop. All because humans fought not for themselves, but for each other. The narrator's voice trembled as he spoke to himself, almost a whisper carried by the wind. If anyone thinks humans are weak, if anyone thinks they can control them, they will learn the truth. And it will be too late. He looked back at the humans, still standing among the ruins, blooded, battered, yet unbroken. Their faces were grim, their eyes still burning with that fire of determination. They did not smile. They did not celebrate. They were already ready for the next battle, the next impossible fight, the next impossible victory. The narrator felt awe. He felt fear. He felt respect. And he knew that the galaxy had changed forever. He turned and began his journey back to the council. He would tell them what he had seen. He would tell them of the humans' courage, their loyalty, their unbreakable will. He would warn them: humanity is not just another species. Humanity is a storm, a force of nature that could sweep across the stars and destroy anyone foolish enough to stand in its path. The narrator knew that some would laugh. Some would doubt. Some would dismiss his warning. But he could not be silent. He had seen the truth. He had fought beside humans. And he had felt the terror they inspired, not in the enemy, but in him. For humans were unstoppable. Humans were terrifying. And one day, the galaxy would see the full meaning of that truth. And when that day came, no one would be safe. The narrator whispered one last time, as the wind carried the cries of the surviving humans across the battlefield. Stand with humans in war, and you will survive. Stand against them, and you will know true fear. The battlefield fell silent once more, but the warning remained, echoing across the stars, a shadow over every world. The humans had won. But the story was far from over. And the galaxy would never forget.